So I want to focus now on the European device requirements, the new MDR IVDR. Hopefully, this is not a shocking concept to most people. We have two new regulations whose date of application has passed, and we're now moving into various implementation activities and timelines. So originally, the intent was that EUDAMED would be available at the date of application of the regulation, so back in 2020. So we're over 5 years later, and we're just really starting. So it is delayed because it was and continues to be a lot more complicated than I think anyone thought. This is the Commission publication, which is what is required to actually start the clock. So they published this, as you can see, in 26 November, and it is the piece that is basically the starting gun and says, okay, now this European database on medical devices, EUDAMED, has achieved functionality. It used to say full functionality, which we know is not true, but it has achieved a minimal viable product, and that's what we're working with right now. I think the interesting thing to note is that as we see other countries come along, add UDI regulations, whether that's in Brazil or Colombia, Australia, Canada is getting quite active again. What we see are additional regulatory requirements. So it's not just UDI for UDI's sake, say as we did in the US, but UDI to solve a particular regulatory use case that is concerning that regulator. That also, I think, comes to bear when we look at some of the quasi-regulatory use cases, what we see, for example, in Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, Brazil, for example, where UDI will be used for certain kinds of import control activities. So there's concern about product that's coming into the country or concerns about counterfeiting. And so there's a desire to leverage UDI to really control what's coming into the country. I want to talk a moment about our friend, the BUDI, the Basic UDI-DI. This is a method that the European regulations has implemented in order to organize groups of products, families of products, if you will, together. In my mind, it's analogous to the model version field that we have in UDI-DI. The intent of that field was to have a higher level identifier for the product so that you could aggregate products under it, particularly from a post-market surveillance perspective. What's important here, I think, is both all of the red and all of the asterisks that you see there. And when you look at that and spend some time reviewing that, what you come away understanding is that once you set your BUDI for a particular device, you really can't change it. All of these attributes are both mandatory and unchangeable moving forward. So once you assign it and describe it from a EUDAMED perspective, it can't change. And then you associate UDI-DIs to it, which means that if you need to change your BUDI, you need to change one of these data attributes, assign a new BUDI, then you also need to assign new UDI-DIs to it. But the whole purpose of this reinvented EUDAMED is transparency. And so there is a lot of information that is both submitted to EUDAMED, but that is also publicly available. So again, just keep all of this in mind as you move through your EUDAMED implementation construct, how you're going to do this, your ideas around what information you're going to provide when and where. So back to EUDAMED, you can see the 6 modules here. The actor module is where you go and you register and you get your single registration number. Manufacturers, both European and non-European manufacturers, authorized reps and importers all need to register and obtain their single registration number. This is how you interact with EUDAMED. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. And again, once that's set, it's set. So keep that in mind as well. And we have our UDI, it's really the device registration UDI module, right? Because we're doing both activities. They used to be 2 separate activities. You had device registration, sort of as you do in the US around registration and listing, and UDI, as you would in UDI-DI in the US. Those 2 concepts and data and modules have been combined into one. So that's why we have sort of the basic UDI and the UDI combined into one workflow, even though it's really two separate regulatory requirements and 2 separate sets of data. It really becomes all one. Again, starting in 28 May, it's required that you use EUDAMED, so you will have to use it to get your SRN, which many companies have already done. You'll have to also use it for UDI and device registration or certificate, and you don't have market surveillance, but those that do will start using it then. From a UDI and device registration perspective, any new device that you put on the market for the first time after 28 May will need to be registered in EUDAMED before you place it on the market. If you have been commercializing a device, either a directive compliant device, a legacy device, or a regulation compliant device, and you continue to commercialize that product after 28 May, that's when you have that additional 6 months to actually register in EUDAMED. So for those products that you are commercializing and continue to commercialize after 28 May, you have till 28 November to register those in EUDAMED.
All right, this one is the vigilance module already available and mandatory?
No, it is neither available nor mandatory. There is a playground, but that is it. So vigilance when vigilance goes, it will be a bigger bang. Because once it is made available, it will be mandatory the day that it's made available.
If my MDR product is already on the market, what's the UDI registration deadline?
November.
Okay.
So, and that's a great question, because that's sort of the bottom line there. Please keep in mind that a lot of attributes in EUDAMED are not updatable, either because the regulation says so or because EUDAMED itself enforces this. So what we used to call or what we still call in GUDI-DI a new DI trigger, we use that term here as well. So there's a lot that can't be updated. Please also keep in mind that unlike GUDI-DI, there is no grace period and there is no unlock. So once you submit your data to EUDAMED and publish it, that's it. It's done. And if you need to make changes, then there are a few data elements that you can update, but most you can't. And if you need to make a change or you made an error, then at least today you would need to create a new DI or a new BUDI and a new DI and enter that and mark that on your product and enter that as a new record in EUDAMED. But as we move to EUDAMED, we see a forced data alignment. So once we start down this road, once we start with our active registration and we obtain our SRN, we start tying things to that, and we don't have a choice anymore. So we'll tie our BUDIs to our SRN, and then we'll tie individual devices at a UDI level to that BUDI. And I think this is going to be the challenge that we haven't come across because the vigilance module isn't available yet and we aren't using it. But I do think that as we look downstream at the subsequent activities that will happen, both at a BUDI level here on the right, as well as to a UDI level here in the middle, particularly around vigilance, we'll see some challenges with how we originally submitted data and these subsequent activities that are going to come at this point much later. So just keep that in mind as you look at how you create your SRNs and your BUDIs and your UDI-DIs, that you're confident that the subsequent data will align as we have to tie the other module information to that.
Most important point I want to emphasize that we can be scalable. We can be scalable to what you need. If it's some level of guidance to begin with, then we're connected with you. And if you need additional support, we can expand accordingly.
Keep in mind that EUDAMED needs to be maintained, right? So we need to deal with not just sort of the initial submissions, but change management, which is, I think, the bigger challenge moving forward. Jim talked about some of the stale data that's in GUDI-DI. As we look at EUDAMED and the forced rigidity of it, you're just not going to be able to do that. You're going to need to keep EUDAMED accurate for the products that you're commercializing, which means changes need to be reflected appropriately in the database. But at the same time, we have a number of other regulators that have regulations in place. So Australia, if you haven't seen, we didn't get a time to get into it, but they have their UDI regulatory requirements and database required, right? We're marching towards those future deadlines. Canada, Brazil, Colombia, right? We have Japan, a number of countries that have regulations in place, and we're just waiting for databases or getting ready to release regulations. So as you look at the data for your products, it's, yes, we're moving from US to Europe, but we're also then taking another couple of pretty big steps and adding other regulators very quickly behind them.